So welcome to the Node.js Technical Steering Committee meeting for July 31st, 2019. We'll follow the agenda that was posted in the GitHub repo as issue number 738. We'll start out with, does anybody have any announcements to share? No, if there's no announcements, then we'll move on to the things tagged for the agenda. So the first one is process improve next tick performance 25461.
Yeah, I'm the one objecting on that. I kind of expressed my objection in the issue, but I think it fundamentally circumvents the expectations that we have around async hook resources. I don't think it's worth the performance upside to start going down this route.
Right, I think I posted not just a few minutes ago, like there's a question near the end that basically is asking if you're still objecting in the current form. So it's probably at worst.
Yeah, I responded in the TSC issue, but I'll respond on the tracker as well.
Yeah, if you can kind of clarify there and maybe summarize what the issues are. And it's probably worth, just giving the people here, a quick summary of the issue.
Yeah, I can give the summary here. I mean, so the change that's being made is basically moving removing symbols and using normal public properties for async ID and trigger async ID on the next tick object, which improves performance. To avoid exposing that to the user land, the other change that's being made is now there's two different objects between like what the next tick object is, the one that we keep track of for the purposes of, actual next tick loop. And then there's a separate object that gets emitted to the async resource hook, actually, when we init it. So the expectation from async hooks would be that those two resources are one the same. That's the whole point of having a resource. Otherwise, I don't really know why it would be there. This fundamentally changes that because now there's two different objects that, if you modify one, the other one doesn't change.
And the resource is there so that people can actually make those modifications.
Sorry?
And like you're saying, if you change, but it's like, that's one of the reasons it's there is to allow people to add data to the object and then get it later on.
I mean, I don't know how people are using it. I don't think it's our call how people are using it, but the resource is there and the assumption, and everywhere throughout the code base, the assumption has held up that those two resources are one and the same. This PR changes that and makes them two different objects. From my perspective, I don't think the performance upside is worth the trade-off of deviating from the precedent that we've established with how async hooks work.
Right. Okay.
So I'm going to dive in because I've had my hand up for a while. Now I've lowered my hand. So it seems like, I put this in the chat, but for because we're on YouTube, I'm going to just say it as well. It seems like we're at an impasse. MSC Dex, Brian White thinks the change should go through. Has said as much. Has said that he's said everything that needs to be said in the tracker. Anatoli thinks it shouldn't go through, has expressed the reasons here, but also has said that he's basically said everything that he thinks needs to be said, in the tracker. So, this is not necessarily heading for a vote, but it's very likely somewhat likely heading for a vote. And, I don't know, we can talk about it more here. I don't know if we're going to really get anywhere because as long as, because the real person that needs to be persuaded is Brian. So,
right. So are you, is there anybody else who is in favor? Who's here? Favor strongly enough to want to.
I don't think anybody is heavily engaged in this issue besides Brian and Anatoli. Okay. I could be wrong. There might be one or two other people, but
there were a few approvals. I'm just wondering if that's, let's see.
I mean, if those people, if there was someone who was heavily invested and engaged, they'd be speaking up right now. So
Right. Like I see Michael Zasso was on the was one of the approvers. Just yeah. Okay. It wasn't another.
My main point is that this stuff, definitely, read through that issue and be prepared to have an opinion, because
Right.
it's, I don't see how we break this impasse without Anatoli and Brian being in the same room or something. And even then, it might just be an impasse.
Yeah, and I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, I agree with you that we're not going to get, those two in the room. And so I guess I'm thinking, like, unless somebody else, unless there was somebody else who was involved, who reviewed it and looked at it, says, hey, wait a sec, no, we should do this. We should likely, somebody should propose a vote.
So one of the things here is that I am not necessarily certain how this will play with some of the async hooks plan, the current resource API, and those things. And if it plays decently well, then it might not be such a bad thing, because of the nice performance improvements.
So here's what, I guess I posted this in the chat, but here's the fundamental thing that to me breaks. If you use async hooks and you want to wrap a next tick callback to understand, maybe you want to install some sort of a wrapper around it to log whatever data is coming through it. With this new change, your wrapper is never going to get invoked.
Okay, then no, we should not do it.
You get the resource, and you think you have the resource, which has callback and arguments on it. You modify them, and they never actually, those changes never get reflected on the actual next tick because the two objects are different.
Yeah, but that object is not, the source objects are not part of the API, right?
Well, they're part of the async hooks API, right? So async hooks.
Yeah, but we don't document what the resource object is. That's what I mean.
Yeah. But we've established the precedent that the resource object is basically the exact thing that, like, I mean, we can make this a semver major, sure. I just don't think that nowhere else have we followed this pattern where the resource is different from.
No, we should not. Like, I agree with you. Okay, yeah, no, I agree with you. Yeah, no, I agree with Anatoli, yeah. One thing, it will be good if you posted a snippet showing what is the problem.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay, because that will help a lot of other people understand what's the situation.
Yeah.
Okay, so that sounds like a good thing to post a snippet. I think, to Rich's point, though, that should we propose a vote at this point?
No. Let's post the snippet and see if that persuades Brian, or if he has a response to it that's persuasive in the other direction. As long as there's conversation happening, let's let it play out. But if Brian or Anatoli wants to call for a vote, that's fine. But I don't think the TSC needs to. There's no rush on this. There's no reason this has to happen this week instead of next week or something. So I would say let's let the conversation play out.
Sounds good. Okay, so anything more on that one before we move on? Okay, so let's move on to the next issue, which is 28439.
There's a couple of attendees who probably need to be promoted to panelists.
Thank you. Okay, done. People can add them to the attendee list too in the minutes. That would be great. So the next issue is 28439 in the node repo, and that is buffer add buffer harden. And Nikita, I think you asked for that to be added.
Yes, that's mine. It's an introduction of an opt-in method that hardens buffer IP. It now disables deprecation buffer IP it disables pooling. It ensures that all buffers are zero filled, including those that were created using buffer allocant safe, and it frees the buffer object and require buffer. I just added documentation for that, so if you haven't seen it yet, perhaps it would make sense to look at it. Let me post the link in the chat. I also made it configurable as James recommended, but because there are many options and we can add some more functionality to this or some similar hardening functionality to other models, I would prefer to give that as JavaScript API instead of command line flags, because if someone would want to manage that with command line flags, they just would get unmaintainable. I have a comment about moving that to command line flags. For example, we could add a command line flag later after this that would require the usage of this API in the first tick, and that would throw the process if this API was not called. That way, a command line flag could ensure that this API is called. That is not done yet, and I don't want that to be a part of the pull request. And apart from what I said, there are also some safeguards that make this IP not usable from libraries. It targets only the top-level application. It will throw it if it is called from node models, and if it will throw if it is called more than once. Perhaps I would like to add something that would make it throw if it is called after the first tick, but that would require some IP changes on different parts of the node. So that is not done yet. So basically, I want to ask what does everyone think about it? For now, I had comments that some would prefer command line flags, but I don't think that it's that will be visible for users or maintainable for them. And there were some comments about making it throw by default on deprecated buffer, and it throws by default now, but that could be configured. So what does everyone think about that approach? Basically, it targets applications. So if we change how that behaves, it could land in one somewhere major, because it should not get into models that are required as dependencies.
So basically, the dependencies would, like, if you enable it in the app, then even if the dependencies use buffer arg, you would see those runtime deprecations, right?
By default, they throw an error right now, but there is an option that we would disable the error and show the deprecations. There is already a command line argument that would throw that would show the deprecations even in node models. The padding deprecations argument does that, but I don't think that many of users know about it, and I don't think that it is something that could be used in production.
Jeremiah has his hand up.
Yeah. So I don't think there's any precedent for doing it this way, where you only allow an API to be called from the top level and not in node modules and that kind of thing. I think that could probably be a pretty good idea. Maybe it'd be interesting to like also think about, if we're going to go with that kind of approach, how applicable is this to other APIs? For example, like some people's deployments have, and I've run into this too, can have issues with applying CLI flags to Node. So, which I guess is part of the idea behind this, and maybe extending that to more than just this would be helpful. And maybe that would be that might be, obviously that would be more work, but it might be a less controversial path. For example, if people are saying, well, this should be a command line option, which I kind of agreed. In a sense, I do think there should be a command line option with it because it's that sort of functionality. But then if there's a way to, properly set command line options only from the top level module, et cetera, where they can be set, obviously some V8 options and stuff you can't set up after startup, but that might be a good path for things. I think it's probably a good idea overall, though, the way this is done.
About command line flags, there are some individual command line flags for some of that functionality, but I think there should be a single option that could be called in an easy way without passing arguments to that, like buffer.harden and nothing else, that would have safe behavior by default. So that would enable all the safeguards by default. And so the whole thing is opt-in, but each separate option is opt-out. I would prefer to keep it that way instead of having a lot of options that one should opt in separately.
Right. I could even see like a harden option, which would then enable buffer.harden, and if there were some other ones in the future, right?
About the future ones, for example, I'm thinking about hardening child process and adding a harden to child process would require specifying some function that will check whether some child process with the given arguments should be called or not. So to allow or disallow child process.
Oh, I need to promote somebody, sorry.
In theory, similar things could be done to outgoing HTTP requests.
What's your thought on Jeremiah's suggestion that potentially it could be, instead of buffer.harden, a generic, set this command line option from within the code?
I think that is orthogonal because of the reasons I mentioned. I would prefer to have a simple option that will allow applications to opt in to it without specifying all the command line flags separately.
But you could have a single --harden buffer and then enable that one.
Yes, that could be done, but I don't see why is that preferable to this API.
So Jeremiah, do you have anything to add on that front, or?
Not really, although I do have another sort of related thought, and that is, since this is process-wide, well, I guess the process thing is only for things that really deal with like the process as it is on the operating system, but maybe like process.harden buffers would make a little bit more sense actually than buffer.harden. Maybe not. I'm not really sure. It's just a thought of, okay, what else could we apply this thinking to so that it's not the only thing, if that's kind of like the objection. Because I don't think that's really been thought about before, and that's definitely something that has run into. I think that's also what this is trying to then solve, which is a larger issue than just for buffer. In fact, I would say probably there are options that people would much rather enable from within their code in their top level module than adjusting buffers.
Yes, there could be more work on hardening, and buffers is basically just a starter. But I think that those would be split per modules, and about process.harden buffers. For me, it's strange for something like that to be in the process modules, because it introduces additional relationship between process and buffer modules, and I think that individual modules could have similar IPs for that separately. And one more thing that I did not mention, this applies only to one process, that is correct. And for example, it does not automatically apply to child process created by the same process. And so any child process that is called by this should apply that call itself. I thought about propagating that for child process, but that is more complex and it could introduce some breakage, so I don't want to do this. So this should be individually applied to each process.
Michael's also made one comment, which is, I like this idea. The advantage of a command line flag is that it propagates to workers. But maybe that's exactly what you were just mentioning, is that it doesn't, what we've got specifically doesn't propagate to child processes, and I guess it may not it probably doesn't propagate to workers either, right?
I mean, child processes inherit the command line option. So if we make something that applies a command line option or something similar, it doesn't need to actually be the command line option, but like applies the functionality of options that would otherwise be there because, having people tamper with them in node modules and stuff could cause unwanted side effects. I don't think that necessarily needs to propagate to a child process.
I'll take a closer look on how this works with workers, but once again about the command line flag. My vision of the command line flag is something like require harden equals buffer. So something like that will require a buffer dot harden call in the first tick of the process. And if that does not happen, it will crash the process. And that thing can propagate. So buffer harden will have to be manually applied to each process.
I mean, that sounds fine to me. Like there's somewhat similar functionality in the -- frozen intrinsics flag, which could similarly be applied under something like that, I suppose. Maybe you want to quote unquote harden intrinsics. Not going to mean the same thing as frozen intrinsics, I don't know. Maybe that's all too complicated, and maybe we should just focus on buffer.harden. I was just kind of giving an option based on what feedback exists and how I think about it, considering that's not sort of functionality that we've considered before.
Chuck, or any other discussion, comments, or next actions you want to get out of bringing this to the agenda?
No, I think that this could be moved to GitHub for now. I just basically wanted to present this to everyone and to collect opinions because there are some controversial things like adding IP that could be only called from the top level code, and this whole option thing, and given our previous buffer discussions, I just wanted to present this to everyone to get their opinions. So this could be moved to GitHub for now.
Yeah, no, I sounds good. I like the option of letting people having opt in. So it's definitely interesting to me. Okay, anybody else have any comments before we move on? Okay, if not, we'll move on to the next items on the agenda. The next one is nominating Beth Griggs. So there continues to be some discussion on how we might address numbers and caps, but there's no update, I don't think, in terms of what we're going to do next on that. Does anybody else have anything to add on that one? Okay, if not, the next issue is the tracking issue for updating TSC on board meetings. So the board meeting was held last Friday. The next meeting is August 23rd, so just keep that in mind if there is anything that you want me to bring to the board, because some lead time is good. I'll just some of the highlights. There's 2 new foundation members, Vincent and Sauce Labs, who both joined at the silver level. I've added the link for the public recording of the meeting if you want to go and reach that. There was an update on the Node.js Interactive, and the CFPs are still on track for being announced today, so we should be seeing those go out. There's an update on the transition, basically the bringing of the 2 foundations, and the key update that was given is that CPC is operating regularly, and that working on key policies as part of that. If you're interested, one of the other things that has been done since the last board meeting and an update was on is that there's been an addition of links for participation. So there's now https openjs.org/collaboration, and that's intended to provide entry points. So pointers to the repos, to the channels, all that kind of stuff. So if you take a look at that and see anything that's missing, that would be good to bring to people's attention. I'll just remind people that if you want, basically, it's generally been something like a weekly update from Jory on what's going on in the CPC. projects at list.openjsf.org is a place you can register to get on the mailing list for that. The other thing that was mentioned was that there's discussion of the travel fund, and there's a proposal currently being worked at stage 0, which is the very initial, like, hey, we have an idea of something we might do. It still needs to go through stage 1, 2, and 3 before it would be adopted. So still expect lots of discussion. And, once that lands at stage 0, the next thing is that there will be issues opened in the ComCom and TSC repo to make sure we get FYI, at least in the Node project. And then there was a marketing update with one of the kind of interesting things was a fairly large increase, 43% in LinkedIn follows. And Rachel took the action to sort of try and see if we can figure out why that jumped so high in the last reporting period. And that's the sort of interesting highlights from what happened in the public board meeting this week. Any questions or comments? Okay, if not, let's move on to I guess the other thing I should mention on that front is I did move our project board, which we had into the TSC repo for issues to be taken to the board. And I've moved it over to the admin repo. So if you're looking for that, that's where it is now. Moving over to the strategic initiatives. Just open that up. Oops, that's not the right, sorry, I just went to the wrong issue. Cut and paste quite correctly. Okay, so just going down through the lists for the people we have here. NAPI, don't have anything to report on there. Workers, Core Promise API. So Core Promise APIs, anything on that side, Matteo?
No news for me. I didn't do much in the last month, so sorry for that. For the last month and a half, I've been pretty inactive overall. I'm currently buried in non-issues, so no,
yeah,
sorry.
sure, no problem. Just going through the checklist, so no update. Jeremiah, new streams.
Nothing last week, however, just from this week, there's a progress update details. A lot of this stuff has been done recently, and we'll link that again.
Okay, so but nothing. V8 currency. I know Michael Zasso can't. Okay, so here's the update from Michael. So V6 is stable. We'll update PR by end of week and work on integration into Node 12. Canary is fine. So V8. Sounds good. Just going through the list. Python and JIP3, I haven't seen an updated list of key things there yet, so no update there. Quick HTTP3.
Yeah, progressing. Implementations there. There's quite a good sized checklist if you want to look at the issues list in the quick repo. It's just making progress, tracking the spec. It's pretty damn complicated implementation, and plus there's some things that I'm doing there to ensure we get absolute best performance. Most of the effort has been kind of figuring out how to work around the existing limitations in the in the Node APIs to ensure we don't kill performance there. So, but it's progressing on track for getting a pull request in, hopefully to land as experimental in Node 12 by October, November.
Okay, it's
November.
You said November, October?
Yeah, I'm hoping to get it in by into experimental on Node 12, but it might have to push to 13.
And I think that's covers everybody that we have here today. in terms of strategic updates. So that takes us to the end of the agenda. Are there any other issues or topics that people would like to talk about before we call a meeting for today? If not, thanks for everybody for attending. And the one thing actually I should ask for is I'm on holiday next week. So is there anybody who is able to chair the meeting? I guess in absence of volunteers here, I'll send out an email to the overall TSC mailing list, see if there's anybody else who can share, and see if I can find somebody. Okay, thanks to everybody. Talk to everybody later.
Bye.
Bye.